Hello and welcome to Gegenpressing, the Bundesliga podcast. I'm Manu and today I'm joined by Stefan Bienkowski and Dan Whiten. How's it going, guys? Stefan, how's your weekend been? This is the Monday. Of course, it was Valentine's Day weekend, so we're recording this a little bit later because, took care of family, friends, and our loved ones. So a day later. But how's it going, bud?
Yeah, very well. Nice, quiet, relaxing weekend. The baby slept well for the first time in about a week or so I feel replenished. Although I made a massive rookie mistake and any kind of new dads out there. Sorry, Dan, to bore you, but this is what Manu and I do now to start every podcast. By the way, we talk about dad stuff. But we bought a backpack to put them on because we had like a little satchel thing that goes around the front, but like when you get too big, it just ruins your back.
Yeah.
We kind of did that thing where we got way too excited and we did like a mini hike and I like hoofed it up a hill with him on my back.
Oh, no.
And I thought, wow, this isn't too bad actually. I feel okay. Once I got my posture right, my back wasn't sore. And then I went to bed that night and I turned to my wife and I thought, I think I'm dying. I think my spleen's about to burst or something. And I'd actually just worked my ab muscles for the first time in like 6 years. But obviously I thought there was something internally wrong with my stomach. Like all men, I just assumed I was dying and, my last rites, I honestly spent much of the weekend just struggling to bend over because like my stomach was so sore. But luckily that came and went after a day or two and I'm back to normal now. But safe to say a lesson has been learned there.
So mine is taking his first steps, which means I can put him on my shoulders now, which makes walking around so much nicer and easier. I just grab him, put him on top of my shoulders, and he's a happy camper. He can see the world. But yeah.
We should say right now the reason that Matt's not here is because he's at Carnival in Cologne, so he's probably on someone's shoulders right now.
Yeah. Or he has like 3 people on his shoulders. I swear to God, that Köln is like drunk half the time. And I want to complain about the fact that it's Rosenmontag and a holiday, but I can't really because like I'm off today. And I swear the only reason why all of Canada is getting a day off is because Quebec, like Köln, has a carnival. And so to compensate the rest of the country, we're getting a day off. We just call it Family Day. Rather than whatever they do in Quebec. So I can't really complain too much about carnival. Dan, where you are, you in Berlin. No holiday for you, eh?
No, but I spent my Valentine's Day with my good friend Harry Kane and a few of his buddies. I went out to Bremen. That was a nice romantic trip out there. I don't know if you saw the social media after the game, but they made Harry Kane hold a sign with a big grin on his face with the line, "I can't stop thinking about you." 2 goals from Harry Kane. And when I saw that, I started thinking maybe my headlines aren't too bad. I try to sneak a pun in there from time to time, but that was that's a new low. And I me, I love a pun. I'm pro pun, but yeah, that's they haven't workshopped that one for too long.
Yeah, I'll get you to write the headlines for the newsletter then, Dan. And why everyone else was given roses for Valentine's Day or a Valentinstag, as they say in German. Harry Kane was gifted another penalty, but we'll get to that. We'll get to that. I want to start the game, the podcast, not the game. I want to start with the Dortmund game. And we had a subscriber in our subscriber chat complain heavily about this match, saying, I'm 24 minutes in and I'm bored to death. And I'm like, yeah, that might be true, but 24 minutes in, Dortmund were already up 2-0 and in cruise control, like absolutely dominated Mainz. This looked like the easiest win all season. It looked like the sort of win that a team at the very best is performing. It looked like, whisper it, a Bayern Munich win, Stefan.
Yeah, it did. I went into this match, and I have to kind of agree with our subscriber, actually, to an extent. I think I posted just before the game started, I was trying to preview it on social media and trying to get people interested in it, but just kind of, build it up a bit. And I was like, it'd be really interesting to see how Dortmund do without Nico Schlotterbeck. And then like 10 minutes later, I was like, turns out they're absolutely fine because, they get a free kick on the edge of the box. Serhou Guirassy knocks it in like he's been scoring goals for fun all season all of a sudden. And then they just kind of keep coming. I think there were a few things at play here. There is something of a phenomenon in the Bundesliga with these Friday night games. I remember I used to do a betting show not that long ago, and we would cover the Bundesliga, and the kind of guy, the seasoned football bettor on the show, used to always say to me that Friday night games in Germany were always like one of the favourite fixtures across European football for people who were like, I don't want to say professional bettors, but like people who took it very seriously. And it's because they always had goals in them. And you can understand why, because after like 15 minutes, any concept of Mainz putting up a fight or Mainz having some sort of tactical ability to break Dortmund down or frustrate them just went straight out the window. And it was Dortmund doing what Dortmund do best, which is really kind of, especially at home, absolutely dominating teams and dominating the middle of the park. And, for sure, Mainz definitely had their chances. They had a golden opportunity at 2-0 to make it 2-1, which, when Niklas Süle just went completely walkies. The same thing happened again, with a goal in the 37th minute, obviously. But which was then ruled offside, obviously. But Mainz definitely had their chances. But I think for the most part, it was a game where we saw, I don't know, man, a Dortmund team that seems to be more and more comfortable with this idea that they are just going to keep winning games, this idea that they are capable of just kind of putting on these performances. I think a huge part of that's obviously the fact that Guirassy has returned to form, and boy, is now a good time for that to happen. We look back over the way the season has played out this season, and we kind of overlooked to an extent the fact that Dortmund have more or less been playing this entire campaign without an actual consistent goal scorer for most of it. And suddenly Guirassy steps up. He suddenly looks like his old self again. And he's on the end of everything. He's causing havoc. He's creating chances. He's creating goals for other players. He's the kind of linchpin of that team. And you very quickly forget that Dortmund have had to kind of work without that for so long. So his return to form has been fantastic. And it was like you said, it was a very kind of comfortable win for Dortmund, and against a Mainz side who have been causing a lot of issues recently, for sure.
Yeah, I mean, Dan, Mainz has always been, since that, when was it, 2023, where Dortmund should have won the title. It's been sort of the team that, no, I don't want to say boogie team, but like a team that even when they came to Signal Iduna Park, there was always a bit of worry. And I agree with Stefan. I thought it was a real test for them. And, they're now in the position where they have to play first and then Bayern play second, because Dortmund, of course, is midweek in the Champions League, right, against Atalanta. So like the way the schedule works, it gives them an earlier kickoff time to give them more time to rest for the Champions League. So they're in the position now where they have to kind of set the stage. And, that has in the past led to results that were not in their favor. But I thought actually this was the most professional we have seen them in a long time.
Yeah, it was. It reminded you of the kind of title races we've seen, whether that be in the Premier League or in Italy and Spain over the last few years, where with modern football, with the better teams getting better and better, you had the team that plays first throws down the gauntlet with a big win, a big assured win, and then they hope that the confidence they show will somehow seep into the opposition's mind. Bayern, of course, we know that they hit back. I think with the Mainz visit to Dortmund, I mean, Niko Kovac was asked about that in the lead up. I think in 50 years' time, when Marco Reus's kids are playing for Dortmund and Emre Can is still somehow the captain, they'll still ask questions. They'll still ask questions about that game and whether you're nervous about Mainz coming to town, because it was such a late collapse. But yeah, Dortmund reacted completely professionally. They seemed in control from start to finish. It was the biggest league win of the season. They haven't won by 4 goals against any opponent all season in the league. So that's that's a massive sign for them. I think my question, and I covered this in the bulletin, the Monday bulletin that we sent out. But I wonder if is this the perfect example of Kovac's football? Is this kind of the is it the picture on the wall that he gives a little kiss to before he goes to bed, because that's what he's aiming for all the time? It's a 4-0 win, but there wasn't a lot of risk. All of the goals came from crosses from Julian Riasson. And he picked up 4 assists, which is a pretty incredible statistic. But it just seemed to be, now you've got Guirassy scoring again. He looks maybe not the best version of him that we've seen, but he looks in decent form once more. And there were some Mainz chances, but not as many as you've had in the last few weeks from everyone Dortmund played. It looked like it at some point. Even though Dortmund was winning, there was always this jeopardy, but there wasn't that. So I wonder if this is, now it's been just over a year since Kovac has been there, and is this the kind of the sign of his impact, I suppose? Is this now has he molded this team into exactly what he wants? Just on that note, there's a journalist, Victor Catalina, a Bayern journalist, who tweeted that Joshua Kimmich's greatest season in terms of assists came during his time under Kovac, when he was crossing in from the wings. Marius Wolf, of course, during his time at Eintracht Frankfurt, pulled off his best season for assists from wing back under Kovac in the year that they won the German Cup. And now Julian Riasson already has 13 in all competitions this season, when he never got above 4, I think, in previous years. So that's clearly something, a hallmark of Kovac's football. He moved away from the kind of dribbly, steppy wingers that Dortmund has had for a while. They sold Jamie Giddens. They didn't bring back Sancho, even though they had the chance to. Instead, they've gone with this wing-back system, which is low risk. There's less risk of losing possession that way. Which Kovac is risk averse. The people who love him and the people who criticize him would agree that he's very risk averse in the way he plays. So perhaps this is an example of true Kovac football perfected 1 year after his arrival.
I mean, just look at the second half of the season, right? Since match day 17, Dortmund are now first. 15 points from 15 games, goal differential 15-5. Bayern Munich are 5 points behind them in the second half of the season. Hoffenheim just behind Dortmund with 12 points. I mean, the second half of the season, they've been absolutely flying, Stefan.
Yeah, they have, and I think Dan makes a really good point about the way that they're playing, and the way that they're playing a kind of Kovac style of football. I was just checking some stats there, and of all the goals Dortmund have scored this season, only 2 of them have come outside the box. I was just checking as well there. If you look at who's been racking up the most XG for Dortmund over the last 5 games, it's more or less Serhou Guirassy and no one else. But then if you look at who's creating the most chances, because I was looking at which players have accumulated the most expected assists, which is just obviously another way of kind of looking at who's been kind of creating the most chances. And sitting top of the pile is Julian Ryerson, and underneath second place, Daniel Svensson, third place, Jan Kuto. So it's just wing back. And then after that, Fabio Silva, not surprisingly, impressively, creates a lot of chances despite the kind of lack of game time he's been getting. But no, Dan's absolutely right. It's swinging the ball into the box and getting on the end of it. And I think 3 of the goals against Mainz were headers, or at least 2 of them were. Set pieces or open play. It's lofted balls into the box, and it's something we've touched on this season, but it's always worth emphasizing. This is a big Dortmund team. They are big guys. They're physical guys. They're strong. They're fast. Kovac values gladiators in the middle of the park. We talked about why Pascal Gross maybe left the club in January and how that maybe raised a few eyebrows, but if you then look at it within the context of how Kovac wants to play, which is with two kind of box-to-box midfielders that can do a bit of everything, both in terms of technical ability, in terms of passing and creating chances, but also physical ability in terms of winning the ball back and tackling players, Gross just couldn't do that anymore. And, I think we've probably seen Julian Brandt at his best when he's not been in the middle of the park there either, because it's not a role that suits him either. And, it definitely worked. It's been working the last kind of couple of weeks, I think, because something's happened there for Guirassy in terms of how he's managed to finally click into that team. And I think maybe as a striker, he's a relatively big guy. I wouldn't really say he's a kind of towering target man, or even really kind of physical, well-built guy. I wouldn't say he's like Lewandowski, for example, who loved tussling with defenders. And I think he maybe has struggled this season to kind of come to terms with the fact that he's no longer playing in a Dortmund team where he can pick up the ball on the edge of the box, play a smart 1-2 with a few players, and then maybe go at the end of it or create a chance or hit a shot in the edge of the box. He's expected to be the striker at the back post, arm wrestling some defender out of the way so he can head home across from, Ryerson or from Svensson. And I think at times he has struggled to kind of come to terms with that. But, we saw in this game, they did a good job of it. He's obviously maybe gotten a bit more physical about him. And as Dan says, with every kind of passing week and every passing month, these guys, either through training or through simple conditioning in the gym, they come to terms with these things and they get better at it. So it's very direct. It's to some degree one-dimensional. And, you can go on any Dortmund forum on the internet and you'll see plenty of people complaining about it, but it's working. And, we kind of laughed. We've been laughing for a while now that it'd be classic Dortmund if they do kind of go on and challenge for the title this season, playing the most unremarkable football after spending so many years trying to emulate what they had under Jurgen Klopp and trying to stay true to the spirit of the club, which is to try and play attacking, fun football. But, it might not be the most entertaining football, but it seems to be getting results.
Well, and the thing is too, like, the only other team that plays like that and plays absolutely boring football, and we rightfully rip them apart for it. But, we're successful with that sort of football against Bayern Munich. It's Arsenal. They do exactly the same thing. It's very physical. It's one-dimensional. It's like throwing balls into the box, hoping for the best, and using the physicality to win games. And
well, who was the last head coach to almost win a title with Dortmund?
Almost the title with Terzic. Yeah,
exactly. And what style of football did he play?
The same thing.
Exactly. Yeah, boring defensive football.
And it got them all the way to a Champions League final as well, which they should have probably won. And again, there was a physical guy up front that, put the ball in the box and hope for Füllkrug. Now it's put the ball in the box and hope for Guirassy. And thankfully for them, it's been working. I think maybe what held them back in the first half of the season is that Guirassy didn't score. But, now that he is scoring again, I think it is something that is working for them. And I unfortunately think that a lot of these big teams are going back to the style of football, because it is a recipe against counter-pressing, gegenpressing. Even Bayern Munich to an extent play now man marking, right? Dan, you and I were in the room with Jurgen Klopp, and when he mentioned that he thinks it's crazy that teams are going back to this. This is a style of football that was practiced in the 1990s. And for so long, we went to zone marking, and now we're playing man marking again because the way that the game has become so physical, it's almost important to do it now. And I think the reason why Dortmund were so inconsistent in the first half of the season, and Dan, feel free to jump in on here on this, but I think the reason for that is because Niko Kovac is completely changed around the way that they were playing football, and it just took a little bit of learning the new style until that clicked.
Yeah, most of these guys they've been brought in under previous coaches, and so they've played previous systems. So I think that has taken a while. The incredible finish to last season was a lot to do with energy and momentum and this kind of I think it had less to do with pure tactics, but of course, there was an interview with Maxi Bayer last week where he said he's never been fitter, no matter where he's played, and Kovac has got them really working hard. And this is kind of Kovac's, that's what it says on the packet for Niko Kovac. If you bring Niko Kovac in, he's getting people to work hard, and he's in his press conferences, it's always these statements about early bird getting the worm and these kind of things that are all kind of hallmarks of his style. Weirdly, the fault on Dortmund this campaign has been that they've faded out late. I think we were talking about it previously, that if you took the Bundesliga table at halftime, Dortmund would be 4 points ahead of Bayern Munich. And that's before Bayern had this run of dropping 5 points in 2 games. So Kovac, I think the last 70 past the 70-minute mark in the league, Dortmund have dropped 10 points. So this is not necessarily a sign of a team who's fighting to the end, but I suppose this kind of thing takes time. I think the big challenge for them in the next little while is that they are playing 2 games a week, unlike Bayern, for the next month, and the injuries are already biting. There's a statement this morning that for tomorrow's game at Atalanta, both Schlotterbeck and Süle will be out. Emre Can's already out, so you're really going to have a makeshift defensive line there. There's these kind of long-term injury absences. This is when it starts to happen. This is kind of the February, March of the year where it catches up with teams. And even if they're kind of playing all on from the same hymn sheet at the moment, I think that there's 1 or 2 more injuries is really going to be a real challenge for them. But we'll see how that plays out. I think we've for the longest time been a little critical of Dortmund and Kovac for being boring, and so I think when they win 4-0 and when they do it very comfortably, we should say congratulations.
Yeah, we should. Also, I just looked at Transfermarkt. We have a statistic there where you can check what the table would look like after a certain amount of minutes of the game played. And if you only take the first half, Dortmund would actually be 4 points ahead of Bayern Munich in the standings. 16 wins, 5 draws, 1 loss versus Bayern Munich's 14 wins, 7 draws, and 1 loss. That's if you only take the first half. And so, consistency, getting the results over the full 90 minutes is something that Dortmund have been struggling with. Let's go to Bayern Munich. They had to respond. And they in Bremen, a Bremen side that has been struggling. Dan, you were at this game, and tell me why this game was more than Bayern Munich clashing against a minnow, getting a penalty, and winning this game.
I mean, that's the ChatGPT really abridged version of the match. But there was it's a thing we've had this year, and I think the quality that Bayern have, Michael Olise missed his first match since arriving. 89 games in a row he's played. He hasn't been injured or suspended in that time, but he had a yellow card suspension. Diaz wasn't at his best on Saturday, but Kane converted a penalty nervously, which I think it's the 3rd game in a row that Bayern started with a penalty. And there's been some complaints about that, but I think if you watch the replay, and we certainly have, you can see that it wasn't given in the stadium, but VAR called the referee over to the little box, and whenever he goes over to the little box, there's usually only one outcome from that. So then that, just as an aside, there was a bit of a groan in the stadium because I think the first 20 minutes was pretty action-packed. It was pretty exciting. You always feel that if something's going to happen with Bayern this season, there needs to be kind of an underlying frustration. That's what happened against Hamburg. That's what happened against Augsburg. When they get frustrated and they lose their kind of manner of playing. But if they get after 20 minutes, they get a penalty, they go ahead. 5 minutes later, Harry Kane just noticed the goalkeeper was slightly over to the side when he was at the penalty arc, took a moment, took a touch, and then scored off the right upright. And then from then on, you kind of thought, okay, this is 2-0 up. They're in control. I think Bremen made a good go of it early in the second half. I mean, I wrote about that in my bulletin this week that Manuel Neuer is, in my opinion, has been the most important player in this run of 12 wins in 13 for Bayern. when he's out as well, that they seem to wobble. He's much more than just what he does between the sticks, but kind of the confidence he gives the centre backs. You see that Bayern centre backs over the years, guys like Hummels, Boateng, they've never played as well as they have with Neuer behind them. That's the feeling that a world-class goalkeeper gives you. And when Bayern came out in the second half without Neuer, who picked up a knock, they looked shaky. Bremen's best part of the match was the 10 minutes after halftime. They hit the post. They really kind of seemed to get through Bayern's midfield pretty well. And with a slice of luck, they might have pulled one goal back, and we would have seen how that is. Neuer has this, this experience, this presence, which really gives the team a lot of calm. In the cup game last week, Leipzig, Bayern against Leipzig, they mentioned in the telecast that Neuer has never lost to Leipzig. And you think about the amount of games that Bayern have lost to Leipzig in recent seasons. Leipzig have kind of emerged as the team that really, at least in gap matches against each other, has really challenged Bayern domestically. Some crucial matches they've won. But you look across Neuer's injury history, and whenever Leipzig have beaten Bayern, and most of the time that they've drawn, Neuer's been out. And it was just an interesting stat that I think really emphasizes his importance to that team. And even though we compare him to the 2014 Neuer, who was something probably none of us had seen before, he's not that guy anymore, but he's still so incredibly important to that team. And I think we probably all agree that this is Bayern's title to win from here on in. But him being out for an unknown period of time, we don't know now. Bayern didn't give an indication. Last year, when he had a calf injury, it's a calf injury again. Last year, he missed 10 matches. Anything like that, I think, would really unsettle the hierarchy there at Bayern. I think that would bring Dortmund back into it to an extent. So we'll have to see how that injury plays out. But overall, Bremen were better than the scoreline suggested, which you can say a lot. I mean, the Bremen fans, if they're not going to, that's not going to keep them in the top division. But I think there's some. If we're going to mention Bremen later, but I think there's some positive signs for Bremen for the remainder of the season. But yeah, overall, it was a more exciting match with a bit more jeopardy than the 3-0 would suggest.
Yeah, I think, I definitely think that we've seen more. We've definitely noticed that Manuel Neuer is human. I'd say in the last couple of years or so. There's mistakes in his games. There is, the injuries are piling up. I'm pretty much the same age as he is, so I understand that like the body just doesn't heal the same way than it used to. Dan, you can relate to as well. We're the same vintage, so we both of us understand.
One of the many things I have in common
with
Manuel Neuer.
Yeah. Well, it's just like we're both active. We both still play sports or do sports. And like an injury that used to be like a couple of days is now a week. Or 2 weeks. Yeah, and so it's
Are you suggesting that you recover from injuries at the same speed as Manuel Neuer? Is that what you're suggesting here?
I don't know.
Sorry, I think that was just what I was trying to figure out there.
I just know that like at 40, the time that it takes, that like something that used to be just a few days is now a few weeks.
You see that across sports as well. You see it across sports, and that's even though he plays as goalkeeper, he still needs that acceleration. He still needs that athleticism to an extent. And so, in the last few seasons, he's had these injury issues. He's come back to be really, really strong. But the last time around, he hurt his calf muscles celebrating in the Champions League, which I mean, Stefan, you mentioned before you were carrying the little one up a mountain, and I don't
know if you guys just heard that there, but sorry to interrupt, but my dog just set off one of the baby toys behind me, so I apologize if anyone heard that.
But yeah, I mean, that's a late 30s, early 40s problem to injure yourself celebrating, which he did, and then he was out for 10 weeks, which I know there was a setback in the rehab and that kind of thing, but that's just a fact of life. Even if you have the best doctors in the world, which he has, um, and we don't know. We don't know. It could be. I think to mention. Often Bayern do this before big games when they'll say, "Oh, there's an injury cloud over a certain player," even though, and then
Mm.
miraculously on game day the player turns up in full form. The difference is that this is still 2 weeks out from the Dortmund game, and it really did seem like something more serious.
Well, they said it was precautionary, right? But like precautionary because they didn't want this to go, want this to get worse than it already was. And as you said, the calf muscles has been an issue. And I think you raise a really important point. Much of Bayern Munich's dominance and the way that they play football and the way that they can play football is because oftentimes they play with an extra field player, right? Because like Neuer pushes up so high. Company's football is man marking, but there's also very high lines, defensive lines. And when you follow the Instagram channel, Bundesliga Instagram channel, I think every week they have like a Neuer highlight where he will like catch a defender at close to the halfway line. And even at his advanced age, even with the mistakes that he makes because of his reflexes slowing down, etc., in the box, having that ability to have that extra player on the field is something that not many other teams around the world have. And I think that is a big factor. Now, Jonas Urbik, I think, is a massive talent. And I think he is probably one of these 3-4 guys who I think will be having a shot at the number one of being Germany's number one goalkeeper. But I don't think he is Manuel Neuer. He's not going to be primetime Manuel Neuer. And that makes, I think, replacing him really difficult. And then, yeah, they have now a couple of weeks, but like the return match is at the Signal Iduna Park, right, Stefan? So without Neuer, I think that could change. That could really kind of change the complexity of this entire matchup.
Yeah, do you know the really interesting thing about all this is the difference between like the eye test and what the stats tell you? Because if you look at the stats, Urbig has actually been better than Neuer this season for Bayern. Like if you look at the expected goals, or they have a specific metric for goalkeepers. It's like goals prevented, which is based on expected goals, save percentages, all those things. Urbig actually outranks Manuel Neuer. But I completely agree with what you guys are saying because I was looking into it earlier this morning because I was thinking about doing a newsletter on this, and then I realised we'll be talking about the show today, and Dan touched on it on the Monday Bulletin, so there's no need to go overkill on it. But I think I completely agree with what you guys say because I was quite surprised to read those stats that Urbig technically on paper has been performing better than him. But I would agree that in terms of the confidence and in terms of the kind of leadership that he offers. And it makes sense because, I mean, look through that team. That Bayern team is stacked full of fantastic players, don't get me wrong, but are there any real leaders in it to an extent? I mean, you can argue in like, who's their best defender? Upamecano. Now, is Upamecano a leader? Is he a captain? No. I wouldn't say so, no. Maybe Jonathan Tah is possibly one of the reasons they signed him from Leverkusen because they thought, well, he's a German national team player. He's a captain at Leverkusen. He has those qualities. Okay, fair enough. But I haven't really got an impression of him this season that he's kind of stepped into a leadership role at Bayern. You then go into midfield. Goretzka's a diminishing force, struggling to get game time. Obviously, Pavlovic isn't going to be a leader. Joshua Kimmich, technically speaking, yes, in a leadership role, but is a player who's had to prove that time and time again over the course of his career because, to be frank, people don't believe it. And then you kind of move into the kind of attacking positions where it's kind of a lot younger players and a lot of players who maybe don't hold down first-team positions. And I would say probably the last maybe leadership player in attack was probably Thomas Muller or Robert Lewandowski, who have now moved on. Harry Kane's obviously a huge player for them, and I think he actually does, to an extent, lead that team in a certain way. But it just goes to show that if you kind of go through that team, and even just a team that was playing at the weekend there's not a huge amount of kind of natural leaders in it. And that probably goes some way to explaining why Neuer is still so important to this side, despite, as you said, now being 40 onwards. But it'll be interesting to see if Urbik can kind of step in and kind of make this role his own, because as you kind of said there, Manu, it's not really about the games they've got coming up specifically, because I think the next game's at home to Eintracht Frankfurt, which, okay, maybe there might be something of an upset there, but I don't think we're really expecting any problems. And then the next home match after that is Gladbach. Now, I know Gladbach obviously have a history with Bayern and causing upsets, but I'm not entirely sure this current iteration of the Foles is going to cause problems. But if you look at their away games they've got coming up, as you mentioned, they've got Borussia Dortmund, but then after that, they've got Bayer Leverkusen away. Then after that, they've got Freiburg away, St. Pauli away, Stuttgart away. And then they play Mainz, who have obviously gotten a lot better as well. So that's 4 or 5 home away games, which cause a lot of problems. And just to kind of circle back to what Dan's really perfect analysis of the game, Bremen did have plenty of chances in this game. And if you kind of look at like XG, for example, throughout the match, I think they finished up on 0.78 to Bayern's 1.88, but it was quite close at times. And we've seen that quite a lot in away games right now with Bayern, where specifically in the first half, they do start quite slowly. Teams do kind of have a go at them, and then, as you say, Bayern get a penalty or Bayern score a goal, then it kind of all falls apart. But one stat that I find really interesting, and I appreciate this is a very hard thing to kind of depict on a podcast for people listening to this when they're driving their kids to school or something. But if you look at the timeline of Bayern's XG against in away games this season, so basically how many chances they give away. Dan's fed up. He's left. He's already bored of what I'm talking about. If you he just got up and walked away. So he's mentioned XG 3 times in 10 minutes. That's over my cap. I'm out of here.
Yeah, that's my threshold.
But if you just bear with me for a moment, if you look at like a timeline of like match day at the bottom and then the number of chances they give away on the horizontal or the vertical axis, in the last kind of 4 or 5 away games, it's really spiked upwards. It was quite steady, just gradually going up because they gave away half chance every week, and has really gone up quite a lot in the last kind of match days. And I touched on it in a newsletter recently, actually, in terms of how many chances they do give away, and how for much of the season they've been playing like the Harlem Globetrotters, and they can create 5 chances for every one that they give away. But I would say maybe the chances they're creating's maybe dried up a little bit, but certainly the chances they're giving away definitely gotten more noticeable in the 4 or 5 weeks. So it's going to be really interesting. It's going to be a really interesting test for Bayern, because if on the one hand they're missing their best goalkeeper, but also one of their biggest leaders, at a time where they do seem to be shipping a lot of chances away from home just before they play Dortmund and Bayer Leverkusen away from home. So some big tests for Bayern, but we'll see how they do. And but these are the games they have to win if they want to be the champions, and usually they do. So we'll see how they go on.
Just one final thing to mention on that is that I'm not sure what it's like in the UK, but in Germany, when you're in the media center before the game, they hand you a piece of paper with the lineups, about half an hour before, and they still hand you a piece of paper because a lot of journalists like to jot down their the formations they expect and that kind of thing. I mean, you can still get it. There are QR codes over here and stuff, but they will hand you that piece of paper, and they handed me at the Bremen game the piece of paper, but it was folded, and I saw the bench, but it looked like the starting side. And the bench for Bayern on Saturday just shows how much talent they have, because you have, at the moment, other than Neuer, they've got a full complement of players. The bench on Saturday was Musiala, Upamecano, Davies, and Pavlovic with Urbig, and then still guys like Ito and Guerrero and stuff like that. Plus, Olise was missing. And at some point in the second half, with around about half an hour to go, you had Davies and Musiala just waiting there to come on. And you think, okay, like at least domestically, if Bayern had bad luck with injuries at the start of the season, they missed Musiala for half a year, Davies the same, Ito around about the same. But now to have a full complement of players, I think that is pretty dangerous. Even if the match is in the balance with 30 minutes to go, to be able to bring on some guys like this, I think it's a massive advantage for them. So I think, like we often do this time of year. We're looking for potential cracks in the chinks in the armor of Bayern, who were ahead on the table. But yeah, that was one thing that I really noticed at some point. I was like, wait a minute, this isn't the starting 11, but anywhere else it would be.
No, and also Dortmund midweek against Atalanta, right? Whereas Bayern have the week off because they finished in that top 8, and that helps. I do think that helps at this time of the year because both Bayern and Dortmund also played at the Club World Cup, right? And those minutes are in the legs. They're not just Manuel Neuer's legs; they're in everyone's legs, and I think that is that's going to be maybe one of those things that we need to watch out for. Like, is it maybe for even good for Dortmund to just bow out of the Champions League and focus on the title if they win that game against Bayern Munich? And it's something that we have to think about. So yeah, it's interesting. It's a really interesting proposition, and I think it's great for us because it just keeps the discussion going on the title race. I do think we have a title race right now. How long is it going to last? We'll see. But Dortmund's performances in the second half certainly suggest that much. Let's go a little bit further down the table. I do this thing every week, right? The 3 games to watch across German football. I highlight a game from the Bundesliga, the Zweite Bundesliga, and the Dritte Liga. The games I picked had 14 goals in them, so I did something right this week. I don't always pick that well. I picked well this week. And one of the games I highlighted was HSV against Union Berlin. And the reason I highlighted this game is twofold. I thought, this is a game between 2 big cities in German football that, frankly speaking, deserve to be further up the table, just because of the size of it. HSV, of course, hasn't really delivered in the last few years. They've only just been back up in the Bundesliga. In fact, this game between HSV and Union Berlin, this is only the 4th time in history this game has happened, right? Because the 2 teams kind of passed each other by in the night. And then, of course, the way they are situated in the table. HSV were going into this game with just 22 points. Union Berlin on 25. HSV still have a game in hand. And as I looked at this fixture, it's like A, 2 big clubs. B, this is a game that really matters for both of them because both of them could put a significant gap to the bottom of the table. And the game delivered. I thought it was a fantastic football match. I thoroughly enjoyed it. HSV ultimately win it 3-2. I apologize to all the Union Berlin fans and also Skyber chat. I know there's a few. But, for HSV, this is a massive result. We looked at them ahead of the season and thought, okay, well, they are going to struggle to maybe stay in the league, potentially do what Schalke did the first time they came back up, right, and then go straight back down. But, Stefan, they have outperformed, I think, all of our expectations. In fact, with the game in hand, if they win this game, and I know I'm getting a little bit ahead of ourselves here, but if they win their game, they're on 28 points. They would be just 3 points behind 7th placed Eintracht Frankfurt, and 7th might be enough for Europe. Now, I'm not suggesting here that HSV are going to be in Europe, but the fact that they're just 3 points behind a potential European space at this stage of the season, I think if you had told that a HSV fan ahead of the season, they would have probably just laughed you out of the room.
Yeah, I mean, I think that says more actually about the table at this moment in time rather than HSV's European ambitions. I think before the match day, we had Freiburg or Union Berlin sitting 7th on like -1 goal difference or something crazy like that. So, there's obviously very little going. I think I checked yesterday, actually, in the last 5 match days, they have climbed 5 spots in the table. So a decent run of form can very quickly turn things around for sure. I'm kind of torn between how I want to kind of approach this performance from HSV because on the one hand, it's off the back of a clear kind of turnaround in form, which they absolutely needed. And even though this match was at home in front of their own fans, where they do pick up the vast majority of their points, came off the back of a win at Heidenheim, which was their first away win in ages, but right off the back of another away performance against St. Pauli, where they did reasonably well. And I say that having been at the previous fixture, I think, Dan, you were there with me actually when we were at the first Hamburg derby of the season, where they got played off the park by St. Pauli. And I think it shows how both clubs have changed very differently there from, I thought on the day St. Pauli looked like the very experienced Bundesliga team and HSV looked like the inexperienced Zweite Bundesliga side. and they've kind of flipped roles now because St. Pauli are really in nosedive form. So, HSV suddenly found some way to start grinding out points away from home, which I think is crucial to how they have kind of start climbing the table. Obviously picked up a big point against Bayern Munich, which is important. They beat Borussia Mönchengladbach. And then, of course, they got a point here against all 3 points against Union Berlin. What I would say, though, is I think this was a game that could have really went either way. Union Berlin missed an open goal. They had a number of chances. It was proper end-to-end, farcical, chaotic football in the most positive, polite way I could put it.
Yeah.
And I think HSV got the rub of the green in this game. I think some Bayern fans would argue they got the rub of the green in the last home match against Bayern Munich as well. But, that's their fortress. That's where they pick up the points in fair play. But it has been absolutely crucial to them this season. And I just think it's so interesting how a little run of form like this can just kind of really pull you away from the rest of the kind of relegation fodder. They obviously had a decent run at the start of the season alongside FC Köln, and then they both kind of plateaued a little bit, and now they're kind of picking up some form again. But it'll be interesting to see how they can obviously do going forward, because they've got Mainz away from home, which, despite what they suggest on Friday, are a very decent team under Urs Fischer, who've been picking up a lot of points. And then they play RB Leipzig and Leverkusen at home, which would be 2 big tests for them. So I do wonder if maybe, Poulsen and the rest of the gang were kind of looking at the fixture list and thinking, we really need to pick up maximum points against Heidenheim and Union Berlin here, or else we'll be in trouble, because, Mainz away and then Leipzig and Leverkusen at home are 2 very big tests for them.
Yeah, and I love how Poulsen has used this momentum in his favor, right? We talk about the second half of the season and the way that they've been playing. I think they're the 7th, if you just take the second half of the season table. And the way that he strengthened Königsdorfer's position. He didn't always have the best form, but he said, like, he's my guy. I'm going to use him, and his goal output has steadily improved. He scored 2 goals in this game. Jatta is another one, right, who really struggled with going up the table, and he basically gave him a new position, plays him a bit more defensively. That has given HSV a lot more stability. And you see it you saw it in this game. Yeah, you need a little bit of that luck, of course, just like they did against Bayern Munich. But I feel like using that momentum to use players that are in form and recognizing that is one of Poulsen's strengths. And the other thing that HSV really have going for them, and then we've all experienced the Volkspark. When the Volkspark is going, it is a stadium that can really propel that momentum even further forward, right? By the game against Bayern Munich, that was a great advertisement for the Bundesliga and why you need to have these big football clubs back in the league. This game was another great example where both fan groups, Union Berlin, they weren't always the biggest club in Berlin, but they're quickly becoming that, and the amount of fans that they have in Berlin and elsewhere is growing and growing as well. And so, I think this game too was a proper advertisement for what the Bundesliga is when the big clubs are in it. And Dan, I know you spend a lot of time in Hannover, for example, right? That's a club that could come back up. Schalke could come back up. If those 2 clubs come up, those are 40 to 55,000 seat stadiums. It just brings something else to the table. And I think HSV just shows that, yeah, okay, like maybe they need to make up the gap for being 7 years in the Zweite Bundesliga financially, but because they have that stadium, because they have 150,000 fans, 150,000 members as a club, the financial capabilities are just so much greater, and to close the gap way quicker than, let's say, a Holstein Kiel or Heidenheim, who are basically just, when they come up, are just trying to survive, right? And I think this season we're really seeing what we were missing when HSV were in the Zweite Bundesliga.
Yeah, absolutely. And that home form, I think 19 of 25 points they've picked up this season have been at home, and then they managed to get an away win last week. So they're gradually getting better. I mean, that game we were at, Stefan, it really felt like, okay, this is a this is an experienced top flight team against newcomers, and they've managed to get better week after week. And also, it's at the end of the day, it's still HSV. There still is off-field stuff going on. I mean, we probably don't really want to get into it here, but the sporting director being let go, and this is playing out in the German media. This is a massive talking point still. But somehow Polzin's managed to insulate the team from a lot of that, which is not the historical case at HSV. And he's got them playing, without really taking all of that other stuff into consideration. So they just seem to be improving. So I think that's a really good sign for them. I think probably they will never say it publicly, but it might not be the worst thing if they don't make it into Europe. Like that Conference League spot can really be a tough one for a club that's not really ready for that. Mainz this year, Heidenheim last year. Like it's, I think, like a nice above halfway in the table finish would be a great way to celebrate being back in the top flight. And then the next step will be to try to hold on to a couple of these guys like Vuskovic and Vieira, their lone players that they have, who have been really essential to their success this season. I mean, this is also something that hampers the second season in the top flight for a lot of promoted clubs, is that these lone players that have been essential impress, and then they get called back to their parent clubs. So that'll be something for HSV to navigate. But again, compared to where they were for the last 7 years, that's a good problem to have. I think holding on to Polzin is incredible, and really the fact that we're talking about Europe, like you said, any Hamburg fan would have taken that. They're a couple more wins away, I think, from being safe. I think they're also saved by the fact that this year, I think at least one of the team going down is pretty set. Heidenheim look like that's and then St. Pauli in 17th. They are now 8 points behind HSV with 12 games to go. So as long as they can grab the points when they can, they've put themselves in a really, really good position now going forward. So I think that that's a great thing for what is, by depending on which metric you want to use, one of the biggest clubs in Germany, regardless of the fact they've been in the second division for the last seven years.
Yeah, I looked it up. 150,000 members now. Those are staggering numbers. Yeah, Stefan, you want to jump in?
Yeah, just one final thing on that, on like the kind of nature of how their season's gone, and I keep going back to Königsdorfer and how he was on the verge of leaving to join Nice. I think Nice actually cancelled a deal, if my memory serves me right. He maybe failed a medical or something, or maybe some deal fell through.
They found something in the medical.
Right, yeah. I can't remember if it was that, or if, someone, the player they were planning on selling hadn't worked out or something, but he almost leaves the club, decides to stay, and then, well, he doesn't decide to stay, the two clubs decide he's staying, and then all of a sudden HSV are like, well, he's actually staying, and actually he's a super important player for us, so we're going to hold on to him. And I wrote a newsletter at the start of the season on how they then decided to make him their penalty taker, even though he'd never actually scored a penalty at senior level. And he's really kind of struggled for form this season. But over the last kind of 4 or 5 games, it's kind of felt like he's finally beginning to look like his old self. He scored a great goal in this game. He was really on top of things. And I think, he's now wanting to think 3 goals in his last 4 games for HSV, or last 5 games. And he's really kind of been the kind of driving force behind his kind of return to form. And it's a really fascinating what-if scenario, if they had kind of ended up selling him. If we would have used that money to maybe sign someone else. But not to say that he's kind of been entirely redeemed, or the fact that we can now kind of say he's had a good season, because I don't think that's quite been the case at all. But this kind of run of form for HSV has definitely been about because of his kind of ability to finally find his feet and finally start scoring goals at this level. And, it could prove to be crucial for HSV come the end of the season.
No, absolutely. We already lost Dan, so Stefan, I think this is a good time to end this.
He thought I was going to start talking about XG again, so he took off early.
Yeah, I think it's his internet in Berlin that cranked out. The snow probably covers like a a power line or whatever it is, or maybe the some radical group turned off the internet. We never know. We'll find out later. Stefan, let's call it a day. And oh, there he is. There's Dan. Just in time to say goodbye.
We were saying you took off again because I was about to start talking about Königsdorfer's XG.
Well, either that or I thought some radical group turned off the internet. You never know in Berlin.
Yeah, my XG threshold, I protect it, with vigor. No, I'm not sure what exactly happened. I thought I was in the thing, but I wasn't. So, hey, surprise.
Absolutely. Well, now that you're here, I can say proper goodbye to all of you. So I'm going to say proper goodbye to all of you. And we'll be back after the Champions League games, of course, as usual. And until then, auf Wiedersehen.